right, everyone. Welcome again. Thank you again for joining the State of Diversity in Tech. We've got some amazing speakers joining us to talk about the current state of diversity in the tech industry. So I'm going to hand things off to Vinay, the founder and CEO of Trust Radius, to get things started.
Thank you, Adele, and welcome everybody to this webinar. First, I want to introduce the panelists who will be joining me here today. First up is Stephanie Herrera, who is currently Global Futures, Computer Futures Global VP for the Salesforce practice. Stephanie started her career in sales at Dell Computer and rose her way up through the ranks there before moving into Salesforce administration at a number of companies, including Spreadfast and Volution here in Austin, Texas. And outside of her work in sort of Salesforce administration, also founded and runs a nonprofit to bring disadvantaged and minority folks into the tech industry through Salesforce administration coaching. So welcome, Stephanie. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Also joining us is Ezine Udezue, who hails actually originally from Nigeria. Came to the US originally to come to school, to college at UT Arlington, went on to do a master's at Stanford and dual MBAs at Cal and Columbia, which is quite a feat, and has held a number of product management roles in her career up to her role today, where she is Vice President of Product Management at Procore Technologies in the construction software industry. Ezine, delighted to have you with us, joining us today. And last but certainly not least, Manny Medina, who today is CEO and founder of Outreach, a highly successful company in the sales engagement space. Outreach has been ranked as one of Forbes' next billion-dollar startups. They recently won accolades on the Forbes Cloud 100 list. They've done that now 2 times. And Manny started his life out in Ecuador, came to the US again for school, studied computer science, went on to do his MBA, and started his first business in 2011 before pivoting to start Outreach in 2014. So terrific to have all 3 of you with me here today. Thank you for volunteering your time and being willing to kind of share your insights. So to kick off today, I'm going to go ahead and just share a little bit of data with everyone about our recent People of Color in Tech report. So Trust Radius, we're a customer review platform for business-to-business technology. About 1 million people use our platform each month to get advice on which products to use and come research products like Procore or Outreach on our platform. But because we have this large audience, when events in our country happened recently, we felt it was important to try and take a leadership role in helping to move forward the dialogue about racial inequality. For a couple of years now, we have been publishing similar research about women in tech, and we felt it was only natural to extend that line of inquiry to people of color in tech as well. So we recently fielded a large survey of about 1,200 people in the tech industry and asked them a series of questions just about the topic of racial equality. And one of the first kind of data points that we've learned from our audience, again, roughly 50-50 Caucasian person of color, is that the vast majority of people, more than 2/3, feel that tech companies need to do more to address racial inequality. It is pretty interesting to call out that 15% of people do feel that companies are doing too much, and that will be perhaps an interesting topic to unpack. But the vast majority of the tech workforce believes that companies should be doing much more. Another issue that we're going to hit on today is the topic of unconscious bias. I have to profess that I wasn't even really familiar with this concept until a few months ago when I became kind of educated on it. And now at Trust Radius, we're actually running unconscious bias workshops for our entire team. I'm personally leading those sessions with small groups in our company, and it's a real serious issue. 45% of people of color believe that unconscious bias plays a major role in the interview and hiring process at their company. 27% of white respondents also agree it is an issue. And I can say that from personal experience growing up in the UK, there was definitely unconscious bias in the hiring processes that I faced when I was leaving university and trying to get my first job. Another thing that we've seen in our data is that people of color often find it harder to speak up and feel confident in the work environment. And part of that is that they struggle to find the same degree of mentorship as white professionals. This is particularly acute for Black or African American tech professionals, as well as for Native American and Latin as well. And again, that will be a topic that we hit on today. So I'm going to pause on sharing data for now and actually invite the panelists to just share a little bit about their personal stories in the tech industry, their ascent to where they are today, and some of the kind of barriers that they've personally faced. Esne, could I call on you actually to go first, please?
Sure. I want to start off and just share that I feel really lucky to have had a lot of allies along the way. At each company that I was at, I had people who really did believe in me. However, there are folks who make it really tough for you along the way. The reality is that companies are made out company and their cultures are formed by people, and these people come with their prejudices, their biases, and I'll share a little about like some of those experiences. I worked in Seattle at a big tech company a while ago, and as a product manager, one of the things that you want is to get great opportunities to have impact for the business. One thing I noticed was, in spite of the degrees, and the only reason I brought up all those degrees is because to give you context, right? In spite of my manager hiring me for the experience I had, etc., whenever there were special strategic projects, I noticed him having to fight on my behalf, or even me raising my hand and saying, I can do it. I wasn't often the first in line or in the CEO's head or whomever. It just didn't occur to them. I had to, over time, obviously, I proved myself. A very specific one that it just, these type of things burn and they're in your heart forever. I may be dating myself. There's a product called My Faves, My Five in Europe. I ended up being the product manager that took that to market. I'll say that when the alpha was done, when it was conceived, obviously I wasn't the first in line. That people didn't think I would be the one to do it. Ultimately, I ended up being offered the opportunity after kind of fighting for it. But the alpha had been done, and there were some changes I knew were fundamental. I'm going to go a little technical, we're people in tech. One of which is, to do this, they had chosen an 8-bit encoding. As a Nigerian with an accented E on my name, I have an E, I know that you can't represent the character in my name with 8-bit. You needed 16-bit. The second was there was an assumption about how people would use it. I think these things were really personal to me. So as I tried to shape the changes, I just received a lot of reticence, a lot of pushback, because the happy path didn't require that thought of, hey, what about the accented E? What about this? The other piece was there was an assumption that people would change their phones often, every 2 years, but that isn't the case if you don't necessarily have the means. So where people thought, well, if we make a mistake with 8-bit 2 years from now, we'll change it. But no, some people are going to have those phones for 6 years. That's just the reality. So into the culture had been woven these assumptions that I hadn't experienced, and I had to be the one that was the proponent for. Long story short, after really raising my hand, trying to shout, really going up against some seasoned architects who were perceived as smarter than I, even though I had the degrees equivalent or better than theirs. And I'd actually worked before. It wasn't as though I'd come out of school. I had worked at Motorola, a tech company. I'd been building base stations. I actually ended up getting the decision changed, and the success allowed us to expand, not just within the US. The same requirements, the same phones were shipped over and used in the UK and beyond the UK and European countries. And that choice of using 16-bit to represent characters ended up being a big deal. I bring that up because I know what happened to me through the process. I'm Nigerian. I came into America feeling really smart, very confident, but there have been little things across my experience that I actually shirked back. I started to not want to speak up, to kind of hide in the corner. And it comes from those little cuts of people second guessing your ability, your intelligence. And it's just something that I'm very aware of for folks who are coming after me. So again, there are many companies out there that have great cultures, but there are other people in those cultures that serve up and create experiences that are full of prejudice or biases. And we just need to be aware of that and understand that the way people of color or women experience it may not be the same for the norm. So I'll pause there, and there are many scenarios of having to retake a test in college because my professor didn't believe that I got that grade. Right? I'll never forget the professor's name. I won't say who he is, but just there's so many of them. But I've never let my career be defined by them because I think it makes you stronger in the end.
Yeah, I mean, before we move on to hear from the others, I want to unpack two kind of key themes that I heard there. One was the fact that you're a Nigerian actually set you up for more success than perhaps an African American because you hadn't faced all of those barriers growing up, right? You're in a country that accepted you for who you were without bias. And I've heard the same from friends who grew up in the Caribbean, versus African Americans. But in America, then facing these barriers where you felt you had to fight that extra bit harder, whereas if you were male and white, maybe the 16-bit argument would have flown a lot more easily, just starts to wear away at you, and that can have two effects. One is it makes you stronger and you tougher and you fight harder, but it then also can gradually kind of erode your confidence as well. So that's what I'm kind of hearing kind of unpacked in your story there, Esene. Stephanie, there's some similarities in your story. I'd love to hear from you next.
Yes, when we were talking yesterday, when Esene had talked about it, I could hear the passion in her voice about having to fight, that frustration, and I've been there. It was refreshing. It was the first panel where I heard it in somebody's voice that knows the fight that we have to do, just like Esene about having to make you stronger. But at some point, you get tired of having to pick up the sword and continue to fight, and you want somebody else to help you fight. And for me, I've been in tech for 22 years. I got my start at Dell, and the only reason I even went to Dell was because my husband at the time, who's white, had a job at Dell, and he's like, you're really good at sales, you should apply. And at the time, dating myself, there was no Google, so it's not like I could Google things and figure it out, and to figure out how to do these things. And coming up through, I didn't have a degree. All my grandparents only went to the 3rd grade. Both my parents only got 9th grade, got their GED. So I didn't come from a background to help me prepare for a company like Google or like Dell and how to get prepared for that interview. But so basically, I went and interviewed just to get him to leave me alone about it. Everybody's been in relationships, you've been married, you just want your significant other to leave you alone, so I'm going to go do it. I went and did it, and somehow I got the job. And I'd never used a computer, and it was a 3-week training program. And there was a guy there who'd been at Dell for a year who recognized that fear on my face. Everybody else had a degree. One guy left his job at NASA to come work at Dell, and at the time, this is when the stock was splitting twice, and people were making a lot of money, so a lot of people wanted to work there. And so he could see that fear in my face when I'd come into class and not know which button to push and what to turn on. So he took me aside and he showed me how to do it. He showed me the shortcuts. He said, this is how you do this is how you do that. And I kind of equate it to the game of life. We can sit here and we can learn the rules. It's not about the rules. It's you got to learn the rules, and we're learning the rules as we go. But there are people that come into the game that have already learned the rules. They know how to play the game. They've been playing the game. It's about learning the strategy. Once you learn the strategy, then that's when you're successful. So I had Travis Hendricks who showed me the strategy. And when he did that, I ramped up even faster. We were tested every single day on speed, on how to navigate the system, product knowledge, and sales technique. And I was always in the top 3 every single day. I learned quickly. And at the final, everybody stayed after to study, and I was so stressed out. It was like imposter syndrome. Like, okay, they're about to find out that I don't belong here. I didn't even want to. Then I was frustrated because I didn't want the stupid job. But then once I got in there, I was like, I want this job. I feel like I'm good at this, and I want to stay. And so we took the exam, and I made the second highest grade because they told everybody. It's like I made the second highest grade on the exam, and I was so proud. I was like, okay, I get to stay, and everybody in the class was upset with me. And again, I'm pretty sure I was the only minority in that class. Everybody else was white, and they were like, you didn't stay and share your knowledge. And I learned from that. I was like, they're right. Like, you didn't have the confidence, because I didn't major in politics. I didn't have the confidence because they were all different. And when you're put in an environment and and everything's different from what you know, and everybody looks differently, your natural instinct and mind is flight or fight. There's fear, and this is different, and so you're afraid, and you don't want to speak up, and you just don't feel like you belong. So that's why I didn't stay. But I learned from that to share my knowledge, and that's what got me on the path that I was on. And so even again, this was 22 years ago, very few minorities, and as a minority woman, I was always one of very few. So any room I went into, everybody was different from me, and I was afraid to speak up. I didn't speak up. And also, especially with the Hispanic culture, you're to be seen and not heard. You just fly under the radar so you don't get discovered. And so I did that a lot, but that was that I learned later was the harder, longer path. Is that what I learned from my friends as I went along and had conversations with them, is that you have to lift your head up. You have to be visible. You have to be the squeaky wheel to get the grease. And I didn't know that for a long time. And I started, I was like, I'm just working hard. I'm working hard and I'm delivering. And I thought, that's what you do, right? You work hard, you'll get the promotion, you'll get the raise. And I learned as I went that that's not the case. And that with hiring managers and teams, you got to understand we're coming into an environment where that it's very different and we don't know. We're afraid to speak up because we believe the stereotype. There's a negative stereotype with Hispanics and African Americans that they're dumb. You work manual labor. We're not thinkers. And we begin to believe that. And it's like, okay, I got lucky that I got in here. Somehow I got a lucky break. And so you do stay quiet, even though you're like, oh, wow, I had that same idea. In Apple, when I finally started to find my voice at Apple, I did speak up with a solution. Was totally looked over. 2 weeks later, a white guy on my team did the same thing. And you would have thought it was the next best thing to slice bread. I was like, I suggested that 2 weeks ago, and nobody saw or heard me or listened. So even when you start to find that voice, you're still invisible. You're still not seen. You're still not. There's no credibility to who we are and what we do. Even on that team, like when I already worked at Dell for 9 years, and when I went to Apple and I negotiated hard for a certain salary or a pay, and they're like, nope, this is what we pay everybody who does this job. 3 months after being at Apple, again, I'm a fast learner. I was training the new people, and I was training an Asian girl who fresh out of college, and she was getting frustrated because she wasn't picking up, and she's like, I can't believe I'm getting paid this much to do this job. And what the amount she said was almost $2 more an hour than I was making, and I had 9 years of experience at Dell, and she was fresh out of college, no job prior experience before that. And it was like, so that's what they pay people like me who don't have a degree. Even though I had all this life experience that I brought with me, that wasn't valued. Only the degree and what she brought was valued. And so after that, I was like, okay, my time here at Apple is clearly numbered because I'm not valued, I'm not seen, I'm going to go back to, and that's when I went back into the Salesforce industry. So there's a lot there that we go through and that we experience. It's gotten a little better, and like Isane said, that I feel lucky. I've had opportunities that people have brought, that I've had people along the way, and the majority of them were white, a lot of them male, a lot of them female, white females and males that have shown me the shortcuts, that have said, hey, this is how you do this, because they've been shown the shortcuts along the way. I love to quote Oprah when she talks about luck. Luck is when preparedness and opportunity come together. We work hard, we're prepared, but we don't always get those opportunities. We don't always get that access that everybody else that's naturally. You talked about mentors. Yeah, I've had great mentors and champions, white men, white women, but I don't have a lot of Spanish mentors and champions to show me how I navigate this white world. I still don't have that. There's not enough of them. And for those of us who are in here, there's a lot of that pressure is put on us to be the mentors to the few that are out there. But there's only so many hours in the day, and that's part of why, when Selena Suarez came to me to help her start Pep Up Tech, even though I'd already been involved with Miravis, I was already doing Sales First Saturday and all this stuff was in my spare time, not my day job. Even though my family got upset with me when I said, yes, I'm going to do this because I felt a responsibility to help my Black and Brown community get into tech, learn the skills, the access. We were trying to figure out how to scale our luck. And that's why we do things like Pep Up Tech. But even sitting here, listening when you were doing the introductions and listening to Manny and Isane's pedigree of degrees, I felt major imposter syndrome. Like, this is a world that puts so much value on that, and I don't have that. How do I show my value and prove that I'm worthy in that world? So that's just, I kind of went off on a tangent here. Sorry.
There's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, I mean, I think you talk a lot about kind of the issue of feeling like an imposter. I'm sure all of us have felt that at some point. Also, kind of like building on Esne's point, there's the fact that when you face barriers and that unconscious bias, it makes you feel even more like like an imposter, and that you're not deserving of being in that spot. But the importance of kind of allyship and leaders, whether unfortunately there are so few people of color leaders today. So for those who are in advantaged positions, whether they're Caucasian or a person of color, or a person of color like me who hasn't really felt disadvantaged in the US, I think what we should learn from this is that there are members on our team who may be feeling this way, who've maybe had these life experiences, and we're going to just have to lead them differently. My head of CS recently recruited an analyst for our team. She's Latina, and she told me that when she was doing her master's degree in data science, the other students told her she was only there because she was Hispanic and she wasn't deserving of a role, and she took a role from someone else. And I thought it was just freaking awful, and that made me mad. But again, we've got to understand the life experiences that others have faced and understand how to rise them up and make people confident. Manny, would love to hear from you now about your journey.
Let me pick up a little bit with as Ine said about when I came out of a computer science background and I immediately took a job, and I had the same sort of challenges of like I remember this one time in which they were taking the smartest kids off of C++ and moving them into Java. Java was hot. I'm dating myself a little bit. To build the billing system. I used to work for a telephone company as well. And I didn't get picked. And it was interesting because everything I learned in school was in Java, because Java was so much easier to learn than C++. And even though, a lot of the other kids who came out of similar, backgrounds and similar schools, they were all Asian and white, and nobody thought that they were Latino kid. And I just realized actually just by hearing your story, there was no Latinos in my class or Blacks at all in programming. So I didn't really put one and one together. So I took a different approach in which like I decided that I was just going to prove everybody wrong, and that I'm just going to outdo the system by being better than the system. So like I got a master's degree in computer science. I worked really hard. Then I got an MBA and I worked even harder. I used to read the Wall Street Journal every day, highlight 5 words, memorize those words, and use them in emails. Sometimes the emails were like, illegible because of all these like big words that I'm using, right, to communicate a point and to like, see people pass me. And sort of that got me to a point, right, of development. Fast forward to today. Now I'm the CEO. I'm the leader. People look up to me. Now I have to flip it, because I can't like hold up all this, pent up anger that I have with society. Because now I need to empathize with a lot of people. Now I have other people that see me as a role model, and I need to figure out how to like turn that into mentorship, into awareness, into seeing people and seeing where they're coming from and empathizing in their journey. So it's a really interesting journey in that you have to play the role in your system to be able to grow out of the system and then change the system. You see what I mean? Like you have to be able to supersede the people around you to be able to help them. And it's that, and when that dawns on you, like it's a little bit liberating, right? Because your past becomes part of your asset. So when I was fundraising, for instance, which is something that you and I talked about, I always got told, you're not technical enough. And I always wonder what that means, right? Like pound by pound, I can outdo a lot of their own co-founders or founders that they have backed, but I wasn't technical enough in the meeting. So I don't know if that, they look at me and they were like, you should be, you should be working on my hedge and mowing my lawn as opposed to you being here in this room, like raising money. So I completely stopped raising money from institutional VCs. I completely stopped and I went and raised from angels because on a one-on-one conversation, I'm pretty engaging. The accent is kind of cute and people like it. And I can get technical with a one-on-one, you know what I mean? And people, people enjoy my company. So I took advantage of that. I raised, a couple $1 million of angel capital in 50,000 increments before I went and raised from VCs. And by the time I raised from VCs, all these VCs were getting barraged with angel intros saying, you got to talk to Manny. Manny's so amazing, blah, blah, blah. So like you got the wind in your back and you got this momentum from people who know you personally. So to break sort of this like systemic, beliefs, you have to break it down to the person and the person has to change. And then at the personal level, you should be able to rise from the ashes of, what the system has put against you. And that's, we're all going to face, some kind of systemic disadvantage, right? Because we are different. We don't look like everybody else. Our story doesn't resonate. I'm not the Stanford hoodie white guy, with a computer science background, introverted, etc. Like I'm loud. I speak with my hands. Like I come from a loud city where it's hot all the time. So like my cousins can't hear me if I'm not raised my voice. So I come from a particular mold that it's not that doesn't look like everything else. But I'm going to play to my advantages. I'm not going to let that stop me and disadvantage me from being who I am, enjoy my process, and actually bring people along to the kind of company they want to invest. They want to invest in applications. They want to invest in B2B SaaS. And they actually, on an individual basis, they actually want to see you succeed. I mean, there's no one, I haven't met a lot of people, and there's a few out there, but I haven't met a lot of people who's like, I don't want Manny to succeed. Most people want you individually to succeed. It's when they're in a group setting that the worst comes out. I mean, it's when the systemic happens when there's a system, right? If you break out the system and you take an individual, the individual is actually very kind. So I always play to that angle, and I feel like that, you break down the system by infiltrating the system and changing it from within. And that's what I think we all have done to some degree and succeeded. Vinay, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah.
Thank you, Manny. And that brings us to kind of a good turning point in the conversation to talk about, so what do we do about this? What sort of change is actually required? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again.
Yeah.
Okay. So as part of our People of Color in Tech survey, we asked respondents, do you believe that D&I initiatives can be effective? And 60% of people very much agreed, with a good portion of them saying extremely or very effective. So the workforce population as a whole believes that D&I can be effective. When we asked CEOs and founders about the effectiveness of D&I, it was a lot more split. 51% actually questioned the effectiveness of diversity and inclusion initiatives. When we unpack that a little bit, though, more than half felt that they should be doing more, but I think just struggled to understand exactly what to do and what would be most effective. When we surveyed individuals about what tech companies could be doing to support D&I more effectively, number one was changing the approach to diversify recruitment, building internal task forces, one-on-one support, advocacy and outreach, etc. But what I'd like to do now is to kind of hear from each of you as the panelists in terms of what you believe can be most effective. Manny, I'd like to flip the order actually. And again, as a CEO who is not just a person of color, but someone who is taking on this issue very seriously and trying to drive a lot of change internally in your own company, would love to hear, how you're approaching it outreach, what's worked, what has been a struggle, and what's the path forward for you?
So I was really surprised at how, people care, but they see it not effective. And I think that this has to do with framing the problem. We find diversity and inclusion to be a weapon, because if you have a good hiring pipeline of diverse candidates and your interview is embracing and you communicate a sense of belonging from the moment somebody walks through the door, from the moment they show up, and you manage to continue to change the DNA of the company by doing that, you have a proprietary pipeline of talent that is not available to anybody else. And you can play that like a fiddle. Like, you can definitely make some damage in terms of getting really good talent in the door. And I'm in Seattle, where I'm fighting it out with Microsoft and Amazon and Expedia and F5 and like every like, we're on top of each other. Everybody's here. You see what I mean? So I always need an angle. So I use the ability to focus on diversity and minority candidates as a way for us to differentiate ourselves and to win awards and to be the best place to work, et cetera. Because once you create that kind of place, even Seattle is very liberal in that respect, but even the majority, you create a differentiated environment where people want to come and work for you. So and that is very rewarding, because we're always beholden by talent, right? Like all tech companies, our talent is usually the shortest pole. The way that we have done it that have been successful has been by picking one thing. So we picked, increasing the number of women in the workplace. And then attacking it from the top and from the bottom by, there's 2 women on my board, 60% of my direct reports are women, and then also giving a task force by manager. These changes are going to be made at the hiring manager level. You see, I mean, like you can't just like have a D&I policy and the hiring manager continues to do the same thing in terms of like the hiring and then the successing, right? You need to make sure that you attract those people and they are, feeling included, feeling supported, and being successful over time. And then making sure that you do a paid equity, check to make sure that, nobody is that pay inequity will happen even if you don't like it, even if you say you don't do it, we will, mistakes will happen. People are human, etc. So you just make sure that you correct it, that you be like, own it, come out to the people who are not paid right and say, look, we made a mistake. We're gonna get you evened out, and you're gonna be good for now, and we're gonna track you. So that's the part that has worked. What hasn't worked is the speed. This takes time. We began this commitment 2.5 years ago, and we're still working through it. So whatever you're gonna pick to choose to change, like we haven't done a great job with Latinos and people of color and brown and black, which is a shame because I'm one of them. But the best time to plan a year is 10 years from now. It's 10 years ago. The next best time is right now. So we're acting right now, and we expect to see results, meaningfully results, meaning move our needle from, I think it's like 5 to 6% to something like in the 10%, 20% range. And that shows progress. The thing that we don't do that I don't think is necessary is sort of create quotas or targets. But if you make people aware and measure and say, this is where we are, this is what I would love for us to be, who disagrees, who agrees, if everybody agrees, it will take care of itself. As long as you measure and make awareness up in front and train people to make sure that there is no unconscious biases in the pipeline process, it does work. It has worked for us.
Yeah, I've heard the theme from others. I've spoken to some D&I leaders, practice leaders who said, yeah, they've cautioned against quotas. And I've seen some large tech companies set quotas, and it can be kind of dangerous to kind of go down that path. But you also talk about, removing unconscious bias in the recruiting process. That's absolutely critical. Everything from resume screening to, first round interviews, etc. Stephanie, would love to hear from you. You've worked at a bunch of tech companies now, and you've also sort of run your nonprofit in terms of getting more people from minority backgrounds into the tech industry. What do you think the industry needs to do? What's on your top 1, 2, 3 list?
As far as the tech industry, they need to partner with the people who are already doing it. I'm sure everybody saw the quote from Harvard CEO today about how he said there's not a large enough pool of Black talent out there, which is wrong. My nonprofit, Pep Up Tech, the Marivis that I'm on the board of directors with, they help veterans and their spouses. We have the talent pool of Black and brown overflowing. We go out and we find them. We find the best and brightest. Then we skill them up. We give them access to our networks, and then we try to help them find jobs. The easy part is finding them. The easy part is skilling them up because they're smart and they're intelligent. The hard part, oddly enough, is getting them jobs. That's the hardest part. We need companies to give opportunity to the Black and browns out there who are coming and knocking on the door. But again, it comes into that whole unconscious bias in the recruiting part, the obstacles that show up there. Once we get people in, like we've got companies right now like Arcus, Roy Khan here in Austin, some Saudi consulting here in Austin that hire our Maribus and our tech students. They give them opportunity and they get in their own backup, hired one of our pop-up tech students. I was on the phone with the CEO, and when we mentioned her name, he was like, "Oh, she's a pop-up tech student? I didn't know she came from y'all. She's awesome." He says, "What? How great she is." It's like, yeah, no kidding. Partner with organizations that are already going out there and finding it. And then once you bring them into your fold, you've got to support them. You can't just expect them, again, it's a game. You expect them to know the rules that the white population has been playing. You've got to assign a mentor, somebody who will help nurture them along the way. When I was at Dell and I was at order processing, I came up with a program where every new person that came in sat with every single person on the team. Companies have this habit of putting people with the most tenured and successful people only. Instead, I had them sit with every single person on the team so they would find somebody that they connected with, that they related to, whom they would feel comfortable asking those dumb questions, on those hard questions. Because if you're not in an environment where you ask questions, you're not going to learn and you're not going to be successful. So you have to pair them up with somebody who's going to show them the shortcuts, and then make sure that they're getting compensated. When you tie that to the mentor's pay, that hey, you are successful, you are responsible for this person's success. It's not only going to make you stronger, it's going to make them stronger, it's going to make the company stronger. Those are the things that I've done in the past and that I've seen that actually works. If we really value this, we have to put our money where our mouth is. You've got to pay people for that. And when you do that, everybody is more successful, everybody gets stronger. Partner with organizations that like Pip Up Tech, Maribus, PyTap in Boston. These are organizations that I work with, have deliver results and go out and find the good talent. But then you've also got to nurture them when they come in. At a company I worked in, walked the floor and saw that one person had one monitor, but other people had two monitors. I was like, well, wait a minute, how come? Well, what's going on here? Why doesn't everybody have the same tools for success? I was like, well, people can buy another monitor if they want, but we only give everybody one monitor. It's like, well, that's not fair. So the people who are already financially have the advantage get an even bigger advantage on the team. That we got to make sure that it's a level playing field in every area that we go. We can't have some people driving a Ford Escort racing against somebody who's driving a Ford Mustang. That's not fair, especially when you get people who are coming from these underrepresented backgrounds. They don't have opportunity, they don't have the means, and they're just scraping to get by and trying to just have enough gas money to get to work. So you've got to make sure, again, partner with organizations that are doing it, assign them a mentor, and then make sure that they have the tools to succeed and give them access to people like myself, one-on-ones. Ricardo Santos, when he took over order processing, he was over all of the sales organization. When he took us over, he sent out an email out to all of the order processing a long time ago. I'm your new RVP. I want to get to know each and every one of you. Set up a 30-minute one-on-one on my calendar so I can meet with each and every one of you. I set up a one-on-one with him, scared to death. Again, I was a lowly order processor. Here he is an RVP at Dell. We spent an hour talking, and I learned so much from him in that conversation that changed the trajectory of my life. So we need leaders making time for people, and giving them access and showing them the ropes. So those are just some of the things that you can do immediately. And Manny, you say you want to turn around and give back. I can help you do that. We Pep Up Tech and Maribus need people who can raise money and funds. Like, let's partner up. Like, we can. Don't reinvent the wheel. There are people out there. Find people to partner up and get there faster, because we don't have time. I get so frustrated when people are like, it's going to take time. That's not fair. White people don't have to wait. They're enjoying their pie. Why can't the brown and blacks also enjoy their pie? We don't want a piece of your pie. We want you to show us how to make that pie, so then we can go share that pie with our family and friends. That's how I think is a good approach to doing it.
Esne, what have you seen work?
Gosh, I'm gonna try and go macro and then be very specific. The things I've seen work are naming it and making people comfortable talking about it. Funny enough, about maybe I'd say 6 years ago, it was kind of uncomfortable for us to utter the words, hey, make sure you have a slate of women, like an equal slate of women in the pipeline. But we've continued to talk about it talk. It was really awkward saying that because people say, well, is it fair? Now we've made it okay to say that and say this is what is necessary in order to get the results we want. So the trainings are great, all that, but if it's still in the instructor's language and you haven't brought it into the culture of the organization, where I can say, hey, I want a slate of women, but I also want to see people of color in the slate. Like I need to see that and talk about it as a thing. I think that's very important. And it helps with microaggressions and all these other things. When your team can talk about it and feel free discussing it, it really begins to even out the culture, in my opinion. The second is that I think you mentioned it, Vinay, which is ensuring that the conditions for success exist inside the org. Just being, as a leader, you just need to be a student, pay attention, because if you put a person of color, a minority, in terms of representation, in a situation where it's just adverse for them, it's like a cyclical process where they just won't succeed, and it continues the prejudices against them. So as a leader, I think it's important that you shape things in order to ensure that there is equity and a sense of belonging. And tied to the last one is just find stories of value, right? So people don't seem to understand why diversity matters, right? So wherever you hear those stories of, oh, wow, somebody who had a name that needed an accent required this, and that helped us do that, those should be stories that are told and told again, so people understand inherently what the value of diversity means. When people say we need people at the table, they understand that. And then practically, I'm spending a lot of time working on ensuring that people who often don't get opportunities in my company have opportunities, from speaking engagements. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of guys speaking on stage. How do we change it up, right? Because there is something that shifts when people have this sense of belonging. It allows them to attract people like them. Like I remember whenever I got to a place and I felt recognized or seen, that's when I was able to refer people. I would go to the referral page, and it just allows for that. If you don't feel you belong, you're not going to ask your friends to come work alongside you. So it doesn't help in that regard. Promotions, people spend a lot of time looking at the hiring, and I think that's really good. However, I now look at our leveling. We were just yesterday, we were having a conversation on our leveling guides. Like, what is the criteria for promotion? There are these prototypical ideas of what leadership should look like, what influence should feel like, right? And when you look at those words and the exemplar, sometimes it is a white male that you're actually referencing and you are benchmarking against. So those are the type of things I'm personally paying attention to, and I'm seeing them work. And I feel really lucky to have leaders at Procore that are pretty astute to this and are leaning in and helping. Stephanie said something, I really want to take it back to how I started the conversation. I said I worked at a company that was challenging, and telco, etc. I will say that one thing that ended up working out was that dual degree I got, my company helped me get it. And I'm bringing it up because of something. At that point, they didn't sponsor executive education, only directors and above, and I wasn't a director. But they paid attention to something. Why hadn't I become a director? In spite of the impact I had. The policy was about ensuring that the people who they sponsored for the executive MBA had driven impact. So here I was, having driven impact, but not a director. I'm very appreciative of the fact that they separated equal from fair. What was fair is that I, who had driven similar or more impact than some of the directors in the company, should have the opportunity to be sponsored because of the impact and the business outcomes I had driven. So that's another thing I think that folks need to pay attention to. Sometimes you do break the rules, quote unquote, but it's about the intent and driving equity. So those are things I've seen that work.
Yeah, I think we're going through this exercise right now. So as a company, we're doing okay on the male-female balance side of things. We have a long ways to go in terms of people of color representation to get it to the level that I would would like. And I think, I think you raised the point, I think both of you, Manny and Esne, about you measure. You've got to start measuring these things. Even if you don't set quotas, you've got to start paying attention to what your ratios are overall, but also in any one recruiting process. So one of the things I'm starting to ask my leaders who are recruiting for a number of roles is, tell me about your pipeline, and not just, and tell me the diversity in your pipeline, all right, on different dimensions. And that wasn't a question I was probably asking even 6 to 10 months ago, frankly. And it's just a conscious change that I've made. And we're having more conversations about it as a management team, number one. So I think that cultural change is really important. The other thing that we're doing, and I had some reservations about it, but I've actually been very happy about it, is running unconscious bias workshops. We break into groups of typically 8, and I'm personally running most of them, everything I can as a CEO, which is a big time commitment. But what I'm finding is we're having them go through all of these tests, online tests, to understand unconscious bias on different dimensions, not just race, but gender, sexual preference, all of these things. And it's been quite revealing. We start with people saying, here are my biases, and I'm not proud of them, but I've got to talk about them openly. And part of addressing unconscious bias is being willing to talk about it. And we had people profess that, you know what, certain candidates they're going to feel a bit more comfortable with because they can relate to them more. They've got a more similar life story, and just recognizing that they have those biases as a starting point, they have to work on them, is really important. I have one of my leaders now who's doing her first round interviews, not on camera on Zoom, but purely on the phone, just to make sure she's checking any biases at the door she might have. So it's a really hard change. The thing I think we're still struggling with is really diversifying the recruitment pool. To some degree, it's constrained by the systemic factors of tech industry representation, or only 5% of people in tech are, of color. And to some degree, I think it's also driven by how companies like ours recruit, in terms of being very network-based. If your network is of a certain ilk, you're going to attract people, in those same concentric circles. So you have to work harder to network in a different way, and diversify your recruitment pool, and do that consciously as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing. I also think there are some great organizations. I've encouraged my team, and I'm personally now involved with a group called Code to College, which is mentoring high school kids to go into the tech industry, and giving them the confidence that they may not feel, because they don't have a parent who's gone through that before, or a big brother or sister, to write a good college essay, to write a resume, and also internships and things like that as well. So I think access is a big deal. And I want to see more and more tech leaders not just work on recruitment and inclusion, but actually try and tackle the systemic foundational issues of access to the industry as a whole. And why do we want to do this? Yes, there's a personal competitive advantage to our company, but I think leadership today is more about, having a positive impact on society, as well as your own personal future and your own balance sheet. And I think, more and more companies are realizing that if they take a system-wide view and help society at large, and kind of do things, act in that way, that's an attractor for candidates who want to work at companies who they feel are mission-oriented in their nature, right? In terms of not just their industry, but just trying to be good actors in the industry. So that's my 2 cents. But I would love for you guys to kind of share your thoughts, and if any of those themes around kind of how you've tackled unconscious bias, or how you're actually tackling the recruiting process. I'd love to unpack those a little bit more. Manny, would you like to maybe, or any of you like to react?
No, I'll say one thing that has shocked me the most in just digging into recruiting, is that oftentimes I just ask, where are you looking, right? And you'll be surprised how people aren't going to, the women in product or women in tech. And it's like, wow, okay, you're definitely not gonna find them sometimes if you don't lean in, or if you don't go to HBCUs, right? So it's just, that's the one thing that I've challenged my current team as well as other teams I've been on, is if you're not fishing in the right pond, you're not going to get the right people, right? So that's one major change, that I've been able to come into each org and say, okay, I'd love to see where you're getting your pipeline and how you're activating that pipeline.
Yeah, I've heard of companies that have stopped paying for referrals, because if you're paying your people for referrals, they're just going to bring their friends in who look just like them. And you're not going to diversify the pipeline that way. But just like you said, going to historically Black universities, there aren't any historically Mexican universities to even pull from. You know, we work in the service industry. And if anything, this pandemic has taught us tech has survived this global crisis that we've been in more than any other industry. And the majority of Black and brown people don't work in tech, they work in the service industry. They're out there in the front lines. My family members are out there in the front lines, and if you know, when that gets taken away, they can't survive in this kind of climate. So we should be, every person of every color should have the opportunity to work in tech, because that's where it's headed. And that's, you know, when we have global pandemics like this and crises like this, tech is set up to survive and do well. You know, we're thriving, we're okay. You know, like, I don't like this little box, but you know, it's first world problems that I have right now. And I saw this great thing about, like, you know, how we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And all of us have very different boats, and there's some people they don't even have a boat. And those are the people that we need to go find and reach out to, because just because they were born into a certain situation and of a certain color doesn't make them less intelligent or hardworking than the rest of us. And that's where we have to go out and do it. I mean, I love to quote Martin Luther King, you know, the greatest question of life is what you're doing for, you know, I just butcher that, but the greatest question in life is, what are you doing for others? You know, we, as you know, we really want to solve this, we have to take action. And I was just on an event with Dr. Condoleezza Rice, and she said, you know, we have to be okay actually with offending people. And I love that. I love that. We have to be okay with offending people, and we have to be okay with getting offended. If you're not offending people and you're not getting offended about this problem, then you are sitting safely on the sidelines being passive. And that's not okay. So you have to ask yourself, how do I go out, as John Lewis said, how do I go out and get into good trouble to help fix this problem? And it does start with each of us. Like, we have to look at our circle of friends first and foremost. Your circle of friends look just like you. If they do, that's a problem. You need to diversify your own circle of friends, and that goes for me as well. Pep Up Tech was founded by 4 women of color. After a year and a half, we're like, okay, we have to diversify our board. We need to bring some white men, white women onto our board, and more people onto our board, so that we have diversity. Some of the people that have helped us through this, like Nick Ham, he's white and he's the CEO of 10K Advisors. He's helped Selena and I through this COVID process. Justin and Jason from Arcus have helped us, and they've hired our students. Like I said, Roycon and Sensati Consulting, they're run by, you know, white individuals who are helping bring on people of color and hiring them. So you have to, like, start with your own circle and make sure that it's diverse, but then do what you can as an individual to go out and bring people into the fold when it comes to tech. Tech is set up to be most successful during times of crisis right now.
Manny, any more thoughts in terms of diversifying the recruiting pool or quashing unconscious bias?
No, I think, I mean, you guys have all had great points. The thing that, you know, to be effective, especially at a startup, we're a 500+ person company, and so we're very small. You know, we've only been around for, you know, 5.5 years. So and all has been, you know, through, you know, very fast periods of growth. And the question is, how do you set sort of like, how do you set it in early so that it becomes part of the culture? You know, what are the things that you're gonna do that sort of like, you don't have to push it because the culture kind of like drags it out of you? And we're still early, which is good, but the question is that you have to focus. You have to be okay. The thing that is most important, and what I think from talking to other leaders, friends of mine in the same boat, is that they're afraid of failure. They're afraid of being calling out for not doing enough. When this is, you know, what we do is what we can and what we have. You know, companies like mine that are sort of like are big enough to are big enough to not be called like a, you know, startup, but are not big enough to be, you know, a public company with like a lot of resources, have to make these trade-offs, right? Like, you know, our numbers are, you know, have to be pristine to go public, right? But at the same time, we want to make a change in the world just the same. So we have to make bets. Some of those bets are going to work out. Some of those bets are not going to work out. And we just need to be comfortable with that. And unfortunately, this period has brought so much anxiety that failure is seen as not trying hard enough. I'm like, "God, we're all trying really hard, you know." So the I was talking to I had one conversation with an agency that was trying to help us connect more directly with historically Black colleges, and we're like, yeah, but the majority of the recruiting has to be moved here in Seattle, and that made the conversation really short. I'm like, okay, so that was a fail, but we'll try it again. That didn't work with that agency. I'm gonna call somebody else and do it again, right? So the thing is that we have to see through the fact that not everything is gonna work, but you have to find. There's no, like, I think it was in the hard thing about the hard things. There's no silver bullet to this problem. You just have a lot of lead ones. So you just kind of have to try a lot of little things that will amount to something until you get momentum. And just like everything else, just keep trying and don't give up. And grit has to be part of it. So.
Adele, have we had any questions from the audience?
Sorry, here we go. We literally just got one as you asked. Let's see. So this is a really good one. So any advice for white folks who are trying to be allies, especially those who aren't in a position of authority or leadership, to directly mentor another person of color?
You don't have to be in a position of leadership or authority. As a matter of fact, I grew the fastest from my peers who were in it with me. No, just help. Like you don't have to be a CEO or a VP to offer help. As a matter of fact, when you get to those levels, you're kind of removed from the problems. You're not in the weeds. They can give you a high level of help and they can give you access, but they can't show you how to do the job. So you're in a perfect position to help. Just look around.
Yeah, I agree with that. The most helpful advice is advice that is tactical that you can deploy right there and then. Usually, when you become such a big leader with high-minded problems and strategy and whatever, like that's not super helpful. But if I can help somebody with, like a small, I signed up for Code 40 for Code. I think it's 2040. Or 4020, I forget exactly what it is, but it's this non-profit in San Francisco that has direct mentor relationships, and I mentor this immigrant kid from Colombia, and I help them to figure out how to build a startup. So how you build a pitch deck, how you think of an idea, how do you find a co-founder, how do you structure a company, etc. It was very tactical advice, like very do this, don't do that, raise on a on a convertible note, not on a price piece. And that got him off to start, right? Like he went to YC, got a startup and got it funded and got it off to the ground, right? It's the little stuff that gets you going in the moment that is the most impactful. It has the most amount of leverage.
Going back to the experience, there are people who are shirking back, who are unsure. So just be an encourager. Use your advantage or your privilege, just to let them know it's okay and encourage. I think that anybody and everybody can do that today.
Right.
I would say be an observer. If you see someone in a meeting not speaking up, if you see someone being interrupted because of unconscious bias reasons, speak up about it and address it. Invite that person to speak up. That's one thing. The second thing, maybe someone's not speaking up about a challenge they have. Maybe they're struggling with something. Maybe it's a tool that they've not used before. It may be a new SDR who's never used outreach yet, So maybe they need a bit of coaching and a little bit more extra help if it's the first time they're in there. And again, if they are feeling like an imposter or a bit more insecure, they may not verbalize the struggle that they're having, and you need to tease it out of them.
Right.
Find organizations like the one that Manny's working with, and organizations like that. We need mentors and volunteers. We need, if you're in the industry, those soft skills that you have are very valuable to the cohort. So find organizations to volunteer. There's not enough mentors to go around. And again, every level is valuable.
Adele, any other questions?
We have one more, and we're at time, but I think this one should be fairly quick because it's very similar to the question that was just asked. So this one is, as someone who isn't an executive or a leader in my organization, I'd like to bring up the topic of diversity within my org, but I don't really know how to approach it. Any tips?
Send the people of color and tech report to your leadership team. That's one.
Bring it up. It's hard. It's hard, but just do it. get, sit in front of a mirror, whatever it is you need to do, but just like raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to discuss this. And I think the response is telling of what you need to do next, right? So don't be complicit.
Find somebody you trust there at the organization who's not a person of color, because you do need them as allies. Because when it's coming from a person, sometimes it can be seen as, oh, this is beneficial to you. Of course you're going to do this. So find a non-person of color that is an ally that you trust, that can help you along the way and support you in that, and will give your voice visibility. Don't do it by yourself. You don't have to do it by yourself. There are people that do want to help.
It's all true. Get allies so that it becomes a movement, and it's not just you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your personal stories, your struggles, your successes, and your ascents to where you are today professionally. And really appreciate you all being part of the report, and for generously sharing your time. Look forward to continuing this conversation in multiple different ways, and also, continuing the dialogue to advance our industry and make the tech industry the industry we really believe it can be, and we really believe it should be. So thank you all, Manny, Stephanie, and Ezine. Delighted to host you today, and bye everyone.
Thank you for having us. Bye everybody.